Yeah, recording in progress. Hey, everybody out there in Stitcherhood. I'm so excited today to be interviewing Dani, who is the proprietress of Picnicwear. Did I say that right? Yeah.
Yeah,
And we were just chatting a little bit, getting to know each other a little. And I would love for you to share a little bit, Dani, about your journey to where you are now and,
yeah,
a little bit about your product and stuff like that. So yeah, tell us what you got,
totally.
girl.
So I grew up in Vancouver, Canada. My parents owned a chain of boutiques, um, uh, women's clothing. And so I've kind of always been really interested in fashion. My mom actually, interestingly enough, she started by sourcing vintage. My dad had an antique store. This is way before I was born. This is like in the 70s. My dad had an antique store, and then my mom started sourcing vintage, and she also started like upcycling. So she would use like vintage tablecloths and stuff like that. And so she started with a little rack in my dad's antique store.
Was
And
she
then it
making
kind of,
clothing out of it?
yeah. So she was making like dresses and tops out of vintage like tablecloths. And I mean, I own a couple pieces because my mom saved stuff, which I'm very happy about. And she also did things like she would take, like, she always has told me about how she would take like men's shirting and she would put pin tucks on the shoulder and make it like suitable for a woman. And so, yeah, that took off. But then ultimately they decided to kind of change the business a little bit, and they started producing not upcycled anymore. And they did about 50% designed in-house in Vancouver, and they actually did their production in Vancouver up until when their stores closed a couple years ago.
Wow.
So they were hit really hard by like the fast fashion boom and everything though. And like, even though their customers said that they loved that it was made in Canada, they couldn't compete with the prices of these like global brands coming in. So that's my parents' story. That's not really my story, but that just kind of shows how I got introduced to fashion. And so I really just always wanted to be a fashion designer. I was fortunate enough to be accepted and have my parents help me out going to FIT. So I went there for 4 years, and that's in New York City. And then out of school, I didn't see myself working for fast fashion at all. I mean, granted, I didn't even know what that term meant back then, but because I needed sponsorship, I ended up working for Urban Outfitters in Philadelphia. I was there for 4.5 years, and then I moved back to New York, worked for Express. All the while, I was not a customer of these. I mean, I was when I was at Urban, but as time went on and I started to see like kind of like how things worked behind the scenes, I stopped really shopping. I stopped buying anything new, and I was always wearing vintage ever since I was a kid. My mom would take me thrifting. But I like kind of had a stopping point probably in like 2017 where I stopped buying anything new in general. And then I got to a point where I was like, what I do for a living doesn't align with my values at all. And I needed sponsorship within the US though. So it was difficult because it's the bigger brands that are able to sponsor foreign people to work for them because they can afford the lawyers and all that.
So that
Um,
had to do with like your work status in the US. Yeah.
exactly.
Yep.
But then I got married. My now husband and I got married, and I all of a sudden had this green card that offered me this freedom that I didn't really have before. And within 6 months, I quit my job. And I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. But I started like freelancing, working for different brands. This is in 2018, I guess. And I actually started my focus was always on sweaters. I've always been like a knitwear geek. So I started combining my love for vintage in general and my love for knitwear. I started a vintage archive. I bought a huge archive from a woman, and I started selling these vintage like knit downs and sweaters two designers as inspiration. And then the pandemic hit, and that was like, I had only been in business for a year, and it was like just the ball was just starting to roll. And then I realized that like I wasn't going to be able, I would bring these physical like suitcases full of inspiration to brand offices. And when the pandemic hit, I was just like, I can't do that anymore. And it's such a tactile thing that I can't really do it over Zoom. So then Picnicwear was born. Like it literally happened because I was like at home and I wanted to make stuff. I had this like urge to make things physically. Like I hadn't really like made things in a really long time. And so I couldn't go out sourcing for fabric. So I used what I had, and what I had was some vintage towels that I had been selling through my vintage. I had like a vintage Etsy shop on the side, and I wanted to make a bucket hat. And I couldn't figure out how to get like the brim at the right angle. So I was like, you know, knowing the basics of pattern making, I was like, well, what if I just like made a long strip and shirred it together and made a flounce that way? And then my like signature hat was born that way. And it just kind of snowballed from there. It was the right place at the right time, because I think there was like definitely an appetite for stuff like that right when the pandemic hit. So it kind of snowballed from there.
That is
was a
so
really long
cool.
answer. Sorry.
No, I love the long answers because I'm the guilty party. Normally I'm like, you know, I definitely go with the long answers. That is really cool. And how cool that you have this affinity for knitwear, because, you know, I kind of knew we were kindred spirits, but now I really know that we are.
Yeah.
And the sweater, is that a Cowichan sweater that you're wearing?
Yes. Yeah. This one I
Vancouver.
in Vancouver, where you can find these at thrift stores.
I lived on Vancouver Island for a couple of years. I did an apprenticeship out there. Yeah.
Oh, that's
I worked
so cool.
for, yeah. Breathtaking. Like, honestly, that place is magical. Yeah, I did an apprenticeship for a production hand weaver when I was in college. Whoa. So it kind of gave me the a lot of experience around, you know, a textile. It's not so one-off business, but you know, a sort of medium-sized small business of you know, production. Cool. And how cool your parents were producing in Vancouver. Like that's pretty notable. So do you have product that you could show our membership handy? Do you have anything that you could just
a couple things? Yeah, give me a second.
Yeah, sure. That'd be fun. I think they'd like to see them. While she's doing that, you guys, check out Picnicwear on Instagram, which is where I found Dani. She has a really fun feed, and she does really cute stories with all of her adventures and finding her raw material. So it's fun to learn that from her. And you can see, look at that rack. Here she comes. Oh yeah.
This is the
most
magical part of my studio. Everything else is, I mean, it's not really a mess. It's organized chaos, but this I thought was a nice background.
It's beautiful. I love how it's all organized, kind of in color family.
Yeah. It's helpful that way. Yeah. So this is the hat that I was talking about. So this is made out of one towel. So I make this kind of shirred brim, and then they're all lined with vintage fabric. This one's lined with a vintage picnic blanket. And then when I've been making tons of these, I start to accumulate a lot of scraps, and I sort my scraps by size, basically. So I've got really small scraps that can be made into my little reusable makeup pads. Gosh, now I don't know where those are, but I could, I've got like a couple right here, actually.
That's okay. I should have told you or asked you before.
No, it's okay. So these get made into like little, like reusable makeup pads. So you can put these in the wash. And then the next larger size, I create the patchwork hats out of. So sometimes I'll cut them as I'm going, and then I keep a storage bin of like a bunch of orange pieces, and then I piece them together. And then otherwise I have like a larger bin where I have like slightly bigger sizes, and because I just don't want to throw anything away. So an example of like a pair of shorts I've made out of bigger remnants. So these are made from like, you know, I might have made out of a towel, I might have made a hat, and then I've got like a large piece left over. So it becomes a panel on one of these shorts. So, and then also like, here's a pullover example.
So cute. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are
And they're
awesome. And they're all
reversible
towels, right? That's
too.
all terry cloth, like vintage.
Yeah. So they're all made from vintage towels. And I try and make as many of my things reversible as possible. I can't do that with the shorts, obviously, but like this, you could wear this as the front or this is the front.
Yep.
It has the same neck drop.
Yep.
So yeah.
That's so cool. So, so just, I want to get clear. So you started Picnicwear when the pandemic hit.
Yeah, I had kind of started it the year prior, like that 1 year after I quit. I had started just as like kind of like a side project, but I wasn't doing anything with the towels at that point. I was actually tie-dyeing vintage sweaters.
Mhm.
So, but that was just like a very like it was a lot of work, and I didn't really have the facilities to be tie-dyeing these sweaters because sweaters get so heavy when they're like soaked in liquid.
Yeah.
So I was like dabbling a little bit with that, but then I kind of like put it aside and started focusing on some like freelance jobs I had and focusing on my knitwear archive business. But then when the pandemic hit, that's when I was like, what can I do right here in my small Brooklyn apartment right now? And it started
Yep.
with just like making one thing. But then when I posted it on my personal Instagram, it kind of, I was like really shocked by the like feedback and excitement it generated. And then so I started sourcing more towels like online at that point, ultimately, because it was
Uh-huh.
like, I couldn't go to stores.
Sure.
So yeah.
That is so cool. So, it might be hard to answer, but what do you like? I kind of am hoping, I'm kind of thinking that like our pandemic will end at some point. And what do you, what do you imagine? Like, if you could see yourself in like 3 years and like the most ideal things to have happened for you,
Yeah.
where do you see yourself? What do you think, will happen, or what would you choose?
I would love to expand Picnicwear to a point where right now, well, when I started, I was just making everything myself. And then I started, my friend Mary, who needed extra work. I went to school with her at FIT. She wanted to help out. So I was like kind of cutting out all the pattern pieces and like tying them together in a rubber band and took a photo showing what would be the front, back, side, what have you. And I would give them to her a package of them and she would sew them together. So that was kind of like the start of what I like to grow to be like a larger cottage industry. And now I work with a team in New York. So before I moved away from New York, I met this woman, Shannon. She had a business called Skilled Laborers Brigade. She still does. I don't know why I said had. And she's a tailor, seamstress, and she works with a bunch of other tailors and seamstresses and factories in New York. And so I will send her a package now, and she works with her team, and she's just like totally like we just clicked immediately. She completely understands what I'm doing. And so she now creates a lot of the stuff for me. Like the items I just showed you were all sewn by her. I do a lot of the sewing on some things like my applique sweaters, sweatshirts, I do all that. But so years from now, I would like to expand that even more. And I would love for it to be in my community, like have a community of sewists working for me. I would love to be able to not just focus on selling online, and I would love to be able to sell in boutiques. And I applied for the West Coast Craft Fair, so I'm hoping that comes through. So yeah, I'd love to be doing what I'm doing and collaborating with different artists and different, craftspeople and just kind of like growing the story of Picnicwear.
That sounds awesome. That's so cool. So one of the things that I guess the thing I first noticed about, or how I found you actually, was on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
And just, one of the things I think a lot of people who are interested in having businesses like ours is the, they get turned around about how to like get their product out into the world, right? Like they
Yeah.
get kind of like, how do you do that? And I guess well, I think people in my age category tend to be a little bit more like not willing to maybe not willing is not the right thing to say, but they feel like they have like an impediment almost, like they can't, like they just don't know how to do it. Do you have any advice for people on, just getting their product in front of people and the right
Yeah,
people?
such an interesting question, because I feel like on the opposite end of the spectrum, I see a lot of younger people who, I don't mean this in a cruel way at all, but like I feel like they don't put the time into creating their vision before they put it out there and offer it for people to buy, and not just creating their vision and what their story is, but also like really honing in on their craft. And it's like overnight people think that they want to monetize it, so, and think that they can and should. And so it's funny because there are those two opposite sides of the spectrum, and finding that balance in between where you've like really honed in on your craft and figured out what your unique voice is and what you're bringing to the table, which is different from others. But then at the same time, you're not like baking it for so long that you never actually share it with anyone. So there's definitely like somewhere in between that I feel like is a hard place to hit. And what advice do I have? I guess
Well, I think that advice is really, really pertinent. And I think
yeah,
just to build that focus, right? Like it's
yeah,
so funny. I just wrote a blog post about how sometimes, and I see this actually, like I thought it was just me for a really long time, but sometimes creativity can actually be like a detriment, right? Because you just like, for the first like 10 years of my business, I had kids clothing, adult clothing for men and women. I had home furnishings, accessories, and toys.
wow,
It was crazy. So I was doing like so many different markets, and it was also really hard for people to identify, like, you're walking, I mean, at the time, like I was saying to you earlier, it was trade shows. So,
yeah,
people be walking down the aisle and you kind of like go by and see, is that for me? And like they
yeah,
couldn't really see because it was just so much to see, right?
yeah,
So you have like a very focused aesthetic and style and process where it's easily identifiable as,
yeah,
oh, that's picnic wear. Oh, and she
yes,
makes cute like hats and summer stuff. Like
yeah,
it's not hard to understand visually like what your brand is about. And I think
yeah,
that is so important. And it's actually something that I touch upon a lot in my teaching is like really, experiment and get creative. And like, absolutely, it takes that work
yeah,
to develop that style. Right.
yeah,
So I think
yeah.
that's spot on in my book. Yeah.
And I think that like what I'm seeing a lot, that is such a shame, is people finding all their inspiration on social media. And so it becomes not only recycling fabric but recycling of other people's ideas, where I try, whenever small designers or people starting out have asked me about this, I've said like, get off of social media, find inspiration elsewhere. Like when I was in school, there was nothing I loved more than going into our library at FIT and just like walking through the aisles without any like idea of where I would end up, and just like pulling out books that would just kind of like get the ball rolling. And I know that's hard to do now, but like get lost in some rabbit hole on the internet and see where it takes you, or go to the thrift store and instead of like looking for something specific, find what your thrift store has an abundance of, and what you can't imagine they would ever sell out of. Like, maybe it's men's shirting. Like there's tons of men's shirting at my thrift store all the time. Buy one of something else and bring it home and just like go wild, like
Yeah.
have a heyday and like figure out what you can make out of that without looking at what other people are making out of it.
I think that's awesome advice too. And just to, I think the people who have found success in really any creative business are the people who are those originators, those idea originators. Like, I remember when I first started my business, running across people who had been, I'm going to be kind and say inspired by my product. And you know, I'm still here 30 years later, and I don't know that they are.
Yeah.
I could probably tell you that they're probably not. Like, I don't really get, I don't get, I don't perseverate on that kind of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
it's like the trolls on the internet. Like, when people leave you crappy comments, I'm just
Yeah.
like, I don't even read them. I just delete them.
Good
But
for you.
so, you can't let that kind of suck your brain power, right?
Yeah.
But like, you can also know from the get-go, like, everybody has the capacity to develop that really cool individual,
Yeah.
creative aesthetic that is theirs. And I think that's really good advice too.
Yeah.
So that is awesome. I'm so glad that we had this time to just chat and learn about each other a little bit. And I look forward to more connection, Dani. I will definitely be back in touch with you about a couple of other
Awesome.
things I have up my sleeve. And if before we sign off of our little interview, could you tell people how to find you? And
Yeah.
yeah, that would be helpful.
The two main places you can find me are my website, picnicwear.com, Picnicwear, not WARE, like picnic wares.
Yeah.
And then Picnicwear, same spelling, on Instagram. So those are the main platforms I'm on. I'm dabbling with TikTok because I've been told that's where I should be, but it's foreign to me, so figuring it out. Yeah, and I'm hoping to be in different, my goal this year is to be able to sell in-person events. So like I said, West Coast Craft Fair, I'm talking to someone who I might be able to sell my stuff in Palm Springs through the fall season, which would be great for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, but you would find that out through my website and Instagram, where I'll be IRL.
Nice. That's awesome. And I think that we will definitely stay in touch. And I think Stitcher Hood folks will definitely be hearing more from you. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for your time today, Dani. And I will pop you an email out with any details, and we'll probably need a few pictures from you
Sure.
for our post. And thanks so
course.
much. Yeah,
Thank
what a
you.
pleasure. Really nice to meet you.
You too.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.